We're gonna have to check this thing out on one of the future episodes. Do a little build breakdown. This is like a really rad car. I really enjoy driving it. I wish there was more demo opportunities to drive this thing actually. It's supposed to go to Saudi Arabia, but it got kind of stuck in shipping, so it's back here. All right, Tim, so what do we got here?
We got a filler neck.
Yeah, this is a badass radium filler neck. There we go. We got a 90 that's going to attach to the fuel cell, and then I'd like to get the filler neck kind of closer to the edge of the car, so as we're filling it, we don't have to lean over so far to the middle of the car. And yeah, I think where we made this mark is a perfect spot for it. We're going to put it right there. We want to match the slope of basically the window angle here, so that way it's not like poking out and looking all weird. We want it nice and flush and not be an eyesore. So I think right there is great, Tim.
Yeah.
So Tim fabbed this mount up. It looks really good. Bent it out of sheet metal. Ready to attach this thing. I'm thinking right here where you marked it, Tim. Cool, you want to get this side? Here's the fuel filler all welded up. It actually feels super sturdy on there. These little tabs bent down like that, it gives it some good structure. Alright, so S15's finally out of here for a little bit. Just out of this spot. We're going to put it on the lift, and we got to weld up some stuff underneath the car. Definitely don't like laying on the ground welding stuff, so I think this is his first time out in the sunlight in quite some time. Actually, first time back on the ground after the cage been installed and all that stuff. Letting that thing run a little bit. Sitting way too long. Got to get the ethanol flowing through those fuel injectors. Make sure it doesn't just crust up from sitting around for forever. Just cleaning up a little bit in here. Gonna get that S15 on the lift. Make a transmission mount. Look at some other areas that we need to weld up because we just didn't have access from underneath the car. Finish up the trans tunnel. When everything's mocked up, we'll put it back on the ground and continue some more fab work. Alright, what are you making there, Tim? So Tim's making a transmission mount. It's kind of a strap piece that we're using as a dig. Alright, this thing's all done. Using like a barbecue brush over here, man.
Yeah, dude, we just made some tenderloins.
Tenderloins. Sweet. This thing's pretty simple looking. Tim finished up the trans mount, and that's what it looks like in its home. It looks really beefy, but it's actually really light because we used 065 chromoly tubing, which is pretty thin wall, and it's strong, but yet it's pretty light. Take a little break from the fab stuff, and let's check out what's going on inside of the field. What's up, Mike? Ooh, we got parts back from machining. So this is all the two-way stuff. This is what most drift cars are running these days. Two-way adjustable shocks, and we use all these components to put the reservoirs together. It's a lot of good stuff, Mike. Now we got to put it all together.
Oh, yeah.
You ready to build a bunch of two-way stuff or what?
Heck yeah.
Let me give you a little rundown on how a two-way shock works. Here's the compression adjuster. The rebound adjuster still remains at the top, like a normal one-way shock, but now inside of the two-way shock, there's actually a one-way valve inside of here that only allows you to adjust rebound while you're turning this knob. On a one-way shock, on our one-way shocks, this knob adjusts rebound and a little bit of compression. But on a two-way shock, we divorce the two completely. So here's what the reservoir looks like. There's nitrogen on one side of the reservoir shock fluid in the other side, and there's actually a dividing piston that floats up and down. So as the shock shaft enters the shock body, that fluid gets displaced into the reservoir. It pushes the dividing piston up, compresses the nitrogen chamber that's inside of there. Here's how the reservoir connects to the bottom of the shock. This is a banjo fitting, but what's cool, it's a Goodrich banjo fitting that's made in USA, super high quality, and it actually swivels. So you can move this thing all around. It floats on 2 O-rings, and we have really good success with this thing being durable. That line goes right into the reservoir. So what happens is, when the fluid enters the reservoir, it goes through this port right here. Inside of there, there's a clicker adjustment assembly. There's actually a shim stack as well. The oil has to flow through that shim stack, and that's a proprietary shim stack. It slows down the oil flow. Basically, you take the mechanical energy, it turns it into heat by flowing through orifices that are inside of this piston. When the shock fluid enters into the reservoir itself, after it gets past the adjuster assembly, which creates compression force, it flows in there. There's a dividing piston that's inside of this thing. The dividing piston then moves down, allowing space for the fluid to enter. On the very end of the reservoir, there's a nitrogen cap. This thing's charged with a needle, actually. We charge it with nitrogen, and it compresses the nitrogen, allowing the fluid to displace. The reason you have nitrogen on the backside is because you want a consistent amount of back pressure inside of the shock. If you don't have back pressure, what happens is, on the rebound stroke, this piston would not be forced back in, and it wouldn't force the shock fluid to go back into the shock. You would actually cavitate. So if you don't have nitrogen pressure or enough pressure, you'll have a shock that is cavitating. The more aggressively the shock is valved, the more nitrogen pressure you need in order to prevent it from cavitating. So one of the big no-nos that a lot of the cheaper two-way shocks have, well, there's a ton of big no-nos, but one of the big no-nos that we've seen is they don't actually have a check valve built inside of this. So as you restrict flow on the compression side, it restricts flow on the rebound side to replenish the shock with shock fluid, and that causes big major cavitation issues. So you could actually hear it. Actually, in this one, it's kind of hard to hear, but there's a check valve built into there, so it allows fluid on the rebound side to replenish the shock quickly without cavitating the shock. So that's a really general rundown of a two-way shock, how it works, and this technology is what we've been using on a lot of drift kits, road race kits, and even some street cars are starting to turn to it because it's so adjustable. Right, so I got this Earl's oil filter adapter. We're going to mount the oil filter remotely, not on the oil pan, but away from the motor. I really like this piece. It's billet. It's not like some of the cast ones out there on the market. If you over tighten one of the fittings on the cast one, they actually crack. This is made out of billet piece, super durable and really easy to use. So I want to stand it off the frame rail a little bit and put it in a spot where changing the oil is really easy and changing the filter itself is super accessible. So I can't bolt this directly to the frame rail because then it would impede on the lower control arm bolt going in and out. We're gonna make a template out of cardboard, and after I like the template that's made out of cardboard, we're gonna put it to metal, cut it out, bend it up, and test fit on the car. So we got this template cut out, and it's going to be bent kind of like so. I'm going to trace this over onto the sheet metal, and then we'll be able to bend it up, tack weld it to the car, and check fitment. Alright, so we got the bracket all bent up, mocked up, bolted to the oil filter adapter, and I want to mount it where it'll be easy to replace the oil filter So I want it to drain straight back down into an oil pan. This is a good spot for it. There's also a lower control arm bolt that we have to avoid. I want to be able to pull this in and out in a hurry. So that's why we made this, so it stands off of the frame rail. I'm going to go ahead and mock it up where I'm happy with it. I don't want it too close to the cross member because we want to be able to remove the cross member and put it in quickly as well. So this looks like a good spot for it right here. Cool, we got an area marked out. We just got to buzz the paint off top and bottom, and we'll be able to weld this bracket on. Be done with this. So we're going to weld this piece in. We're actually just going to tack it in, make sure everything's good. We're going to pull the oil filter bracket off and then finish welding it. Oh, the ground's no good.
Is it whack? You want to move it?
No, that's all right. So one corner is in, and now I could make sure that I like the angle of it, because at least one tack's holding it in a position where I could work with it. And it looks pretty good as far as the angle is concerned, so I'm going to buzz another tack, which will square it up, and then from there we can put a few more tacks in and pull everything apart and finish welding it. So we're all done with the oil filter bracket, and this is what it looks like after it's been welded in place. We've been waiting for these parts, and it's always so nice to get stuff in the mail.
Got the good.
Yeah, AccuSump brackets, some fittings for the overflow and expansion tank, and I'm actually really excited to check out this expansion tank because it is an expansion tank and overflow all in one unit. So we got some more parts that came in, and we're getting to the point where we're mocking the last bits and pieces up on this car. I really want to strip it all apart and paint it again. So what we got here is the Canton Racing expansion tank and overflow all in one, which is badass because it looks like one unit and there's no external plumbing. It's actually plumbed internally to do what it's supposed to do, and it's got this nice little window to show us the level in the overflow. So what's going to happen is we're going to go from the top of the radiator, the highest point, to the bottom of the expansion tank. That way we can fill the radiator by filling the expansion tank. And we're going to mount this up right here. It's higher than the radiator, which is exactly what we need it to do. So that way it's self-bleeding. All the air rises to the highest point. And this thing's kind of big, but honestly, I can't complain about having a bunch of water in the expansion tank and a nice hefty overflow as well. And it just happens to fit within our firewall. So we're going to mount it right here. Tim, let's make the tabs flush with the firewall. So make a tab here, another tab there. We'll have a tab that drops down over here. We're going to get rid of this tab. 3 is definitely plenty. And we got some ports at the bottom of the tank. We're not going to use those. We're going to make a dash 10 port right here, and it'll go straight to the highest point of the radiator right there. I've always ran wet sump engines in all my drift cars, including the new S15 build, Canton Racing oil pan. And in order for a wet sump to work in drifting, especially if it's a front sump pan, you got to use an AccuSump. That's how I've been getting by with running a wet sump system. I don't want to go dry sump because there's a lot more plumbing involved. It's just a whole new thing for me to learn, and it's a lot more expensive. So what we're going to do is we're going to mount this AccuSump in the very back of the car, and we're going to actuate it with a manual valve and a cable that goes to the inside of the car. I've always used a manual valve. I just know it works. I'm very comfortable with it, and it's simple to actuate. So Tim fabbed up these mounts for the AccuSump right here, and that's going to allow us to weld the mounts to the chassis, and then you could bolt or unbolt the AccuSump. We don't really pull it in and out of the car much throughout the season. It's kind of one of those things where if you keep a good eye on it and you rebuild it in the off season, the thing's just solid. So let's, Tim, you want to grab this camera? Yep. All right. That fits good, man.
Nice.
Let me grab that camera and tack this thing in. Ready, Tim?
Mm-hmm.
Hold on. Yeah. Yep.
All good?
I hope so, man. It looks good from here. I'm just going to close my eyes while you tack. Oh, that's a man tack. Wait, hold on, let me make sure it's straight right now. Yeah. I think she's good. Let's give it a tack.
Yeah, let me add one more here.
All right. Yeah. All right, we got the AccuSum mounted up. It's tacked in place, and it looks perfect. That's exactly where I want it to be. So now we got to attach this manual cable to the AccuSum valve. So the AccuSum valve, when we received it, the orientation of the valve arm was like that. That doesn't work for us because when the cable has the wrong angle. So what we did is we just chopped this off. We're gonna flip it, and we're gonna weld it right here, and that gives us the right orientation as it opens and closes. It'll be lined up with where we want the cable to be. We're just gonna build up a tab right here for the cable to mount up, and you can adjust basically where the cable is at. Pretty similar to how my S14 is plumbed and how the AccuSum's installed. So we're gonna do a similar thing on here, and we'll be all done with the AccuSum mounting. We got the suspension mocked up on the car, as you can see, and this is pretty much full compression. So this is as compressed as the suspension will get, and it's really important to do this at this stage because we want to make sure all the metal is trimmed, like the inner fenders are actually clearanced out as much as they need to be before we start, you know, painting the car and wrapping stuff up, because then we don't want to be cutting into it or grinding into it afterwards. So these are the 2F Performance body panels. I like to run a little bit wider on the suspension than they would allow. So as you can see, without an over fender, you'd have a lot of poke. And what I see is that I have a little bit of a gap between the tire and chassis there still, but in the back, we're very limited. So we got to take care of that. All right, so this is where we're having the clearance issue. We recessed out an area. We're gonna shape this metal back to close this gap back up, and that'll give us the clearance that we want. So we'll have equal clearance all the way around the inner wheel well. The actual WiseFab kit, what's cool about it is as the suspension cycles, it doesn't suck the suspension forward. That's kind of like a flaw of the S chassis. The way this is designed, it shoots up, and depending on how you have your traction arm adjusted, it could actually arc back a little bit, or at least go straight up and down. So your wheelbase isn't shrinking upon suspension compression, which is what robs traction, or one of the things that's robbing traction is when you're shrinking your wheelbase as you go through stroke. Well, that closed up pretty good. You can massage it a little more and it'll be perfect. All right, zap that thing on. All right, you definitely got more clearance here. Let's go all the way up on that screw jack and let's see what we get. Yeah, so we got clearance where we made the cut, and yeah, that's all she's gonna go. It's hitting the chassis right there, and you trim the fiberglass right to the proper spot. So that's as good as she's gonna get. But honestly, that's a lot of suspension stroke. That's gonna be perfect. After geeking out on lengths for WiseFab arms and links, testing all these different wheel spacer combinations, I think we have it down what's going to work, and this is what it looks like at full compression. Pretty gnarly, but that's what it takes. So especially on tracks that have a big bump like Florida, in Orlando, coming off the bank. You're going to see this car doing this over and over again. So yeah, it all fits. We got a lot of suspension travel, and I'm feeling pretty confident about finalizing the fab work in the rear, and then onto fitting more of the body kit. Here's what the Wisefab looks all cycled up, and it's just a mock-up feel for one shock. And there's a little bit of spot for the bump stop or a Fabs kit to adjust the bump stop to engage before the wheel would hit the bodywork, and you can see it's really close everywhere here. But we got equal distance all the way around the wheel well, and I am stoked on that. All right, so that's it for this video. We got a lot of stuff going on. I just don't want to make a 20+ minute long video, so we're gonna cut it here, and we're gonna continue to show you the progress of this car. I'm very excited because we're getting very close to getting it to the point where we're gonna take it apart, clean everything, paint it, put it back together. We'll see if we get there before the next episode.